This week we will discuss potential impacts to wildlife and vegetation. Most of our environmental analysis up till now has dealt with the physical environment, wetlands and water, for example. When we begin to discuss the effects on wildlife, most citizens become engaged because of our natural love of nature and the inherent value we place on wildlife in general. In some ways, it would make sense to do this impact analysis first to capture the public's attention, but in order to really understand the potential impacts on wildlife, you have to assess the impacts on the ecosystems they depend on first. In some cases, certain wildlife species and ecosystem types receive special protections, for example, endangered species in their critical habitat. And for these, you will have to reserve special attention in your NEPA analysis. The Endangered Species Act is extremely explicit about the special protections provided for listed species and their designated critical habitat. Any project that has the potential to impact these species anywhere within their potential range will have to coordinate with the responsible agencies, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service, to assure that the project will have no impacts to listed species. The presence of a listed species is a potential fatal flaw or constraint to the success of your project. Even in urban areas, almost all human activities affect wildlife. Negative impacts can be divided into those that impact the environment in a relatively permanent way and those that cause changes to an animal's behavior. Changes to an animal's habitat, such as agriculture, forestry, off-road vehicle use, and livestock grazing, alter the structure and composition of the landscape and vegetation. Land use and land management practices change the trajectory of ecological succession by altering habitat components important to wildlife survival and distribution across the landscape. The larger the species' habitat range and the more complex their life cycle, the more impacts will be predicted. Impacts to vegetation can have both short and long-term effects to wildlife, especially if they change nesting or other important life cycle requirements. Less obvious are impacts from non-consumptive human activities that do not so obviously impact the physical environment, but can affect wildlife adversely, including recreational activities such as hiking, boating, and wildlife viewing, all common activities to visitors in parks and other recreational areas. The importance of recreational activities on wildlife is related to the type, duration, magnitude, location, and timing of the activity. Even though any one activity may be short in duration, the cumulative impacts can severely impact wildlife. Observed impacts can be increased energetic stresses, changes in activity budgets, displacement from preferred environments, and reduced productivity through abandonment and decreased survival of young. Even projects designed to enhance or otherwise improve wildlife habitat can have short and long-term negative impacts that must be considered. In some cases, the no-action alternative may offer compelling reasons to leave well enough alone. Remember, too, that due to the relatively short lifespans of most wildlife species, contaminant impacts are usually acute, resulting in fish kills and avoidance of chemical spill areas, for example. But long-term impacts on hazardous waste sites might be minimal. And don't forget that wildlife have important impacts to vegetation as well. The reintroduction of wolves to former habitat in the West has resulted in cascading impacts all the way down to vegetation cover by reducing grazing animal populations. So in this final section of your analysis, you will need to exercise your knowledge of ecosystem processes and apply it to the complicated relationships between wildlife, vegetation, and the physical features of the environment, and your project's potential impacts on these relationships.